Well, good evening. Let's all get a songbook and turn to page 575. I'm facing the wrong way. I'm hid behind a wall. I don't have a pulpit. But we'll make it work. Some of you think I'm over there hiding behind that wall, don't you? I may have to check this. Okay. You see the door up here. They're going to use that tomorrow evening in their play. I think I'm going to come through it in a minute just to make sure it works. What a fellowship, what a joy divine, leaning on the everlasting arms. What a blessedness, what a peace is mine, leaning on the everlasting arms. Leaning, safe and secure from all alarms. Leaning on the everlasting arms. Oh, how sweet to walk in this pilgrim way, leaning on the everlasting arms. Oh, how bright the path grows from day to day, leaning on the everlasting arms. Leaning, safe and secure from all alarms. Leaning on the everlasting arms. What have I to dread? What have I to fear? Leaning on the everlasting arms. I have a blessed peace with my Lord so near. Leaning on the everlasting arms. Leaning, safe and secure from all alarms. Leaning on the everlasting arms. Brother Kermit, would you pray for us? Where's he at? Fine door he got there. Fine door. I figured if anybody's going to tear it down, maybe I should do it early so they could work on it again. Well, it's good to have everybody here tonight. This is a little awkward for me. Brian, for some reason, when Brian comes over here to teach, or Matthew, I don't know, I can't remember Brad, it's like the pulpit is cursed. They can't stand behind it. They got to get out here somewhere, and they got to get them one of these things. And I despise this thing. And besides that, it's heavy. But we'll make it work for tonight. I typed up all my verses so I don't have to open two books at one time. So that part will work. But tomorrow night, do pray for our young people. Tomorrow night, they're having their Christmas program. And that's always, I think it's more difficult for the teachers than it is for the kids because they get nervous. But that's going on. And you're welcome to come. There'll probably be a full house, but you're welcome to come see what's going on. They do a great job, a little bit more than what the average would be, and they do an excellent job. So we look forward to that. Then, of course, this Sunday is our Christmas, community Christmas, and after the service, we'll have a big meal over there. I don't know who all's names is back there for baskets and things, but probably if your name's on the list, we'll be checking to make sure if we have it. If we don't, somehow I'll probably give you a call on Friday or Saturday so we can make sure we get them all. And then I'm assuming sometime Saturday, we're going to set up all the tables and chairs over there. If you happen to be someone who has chairs at your house, like last night, my wife had the ladies group all over there. So I have probably 10 of the church's chairs over there. So I will get them back. But if you happen to have any church's chairs or tables, if you could bring them back, we can use them for this night, for Saturday or for Sunday, because hopefully we're going to have a full house. I don't have any other announcements that I know of, so let's move to our prayer list. Make myself a little room up here. What is going on on our prayer list? I see Mr. John Hawk's back with us. He wasn't feeling well Sunday, and Mr. Jeff's back with us. He wasn't feeling too well Sunday, and some others. The Loopers, they've been down terrorizing Florida with Mary Jervis's, and now they're getting ready to take a cruise. But I checked on Mary Jervis today, see if she survived their visit, but they've been having a good time. So, yes, ma'am. Okay. Larry Price up from the bottom. Okay, on the 17th. And since, Brad, you got an extra pen again tonight? No pens? Oh well. I've got a pen. It's in the pulpit, wherever the pulpit is. Thank you, sis. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And I didn't mention this. You probably already know it because you come in here, but I did check the blacktop and everything around 5 o'clock, and it was in good shape. But since then, it has become very slick. So the good thing is, if you park that way, it's all downhill. So when you go out, if you hit the ground, just keeps going, and you don't bother to get up till you get back to your car. But if you see, now my wife's dad, he walked over. He didn't want to drive his golf cart. He's afraid he might wreck it. There's a good chance he's going to wreck it anytime he gets in it, if you've ever rode with him. But so he's on his way. He's all downhill. He's at the bottom of the hill. So if you happen to look out and he's maybe halfway, just kind of keep scooting him that way. We get him to the door. We'll go over there and pick him up and get him inside. But he'll be down through there somewhere. But it is slick, and it doesn't take. I have found that the quick recovery I used to have when my feet slipped, it's not near as quick as it used to be. There's a real good chance that my arms and hands are going to hit the ground this time when my feet slide, but my feet don't recover near as fast. What else going on the prayer list? Bentley? Well, you also see Ashley Walden on there. As far as I know, she will be going in tomorrow. I don't know, do you know if they're doing a C-section? Don't know, but her blood pressure and everything's up, so they've not let her do anything. They told her to come back Thursday, and she's going to have the baby, so that'll be sometime tomorrow. Number 16. Is that right? I don't think, we only had 5. I don't think we could have got to 16. But we'd either killed one another or Dad would have started knocking us off and getting rid of us. So anybody else got a family of 16 brothers or sisters? 18, anything? That's a pretty good sized family. Well, the big families from the Tackett's and the Hatfields and the McCoys. All three of those families are. Well, we didn't get many updates on our prayer list tonight. Yeah, I guess it could be. Well, let's open to the book of Acts, chapter number 10. I put my notes in here a little different when I got one of these little things, so you may see me trying to turn pages or figure out where I'm going. But we started a thought of last week, and I never did come up with a good terminology for the word, and I still have not. But I call it holy moments, times when God just kind of gets our attention. And today I'm going to share what I call a connected holy moment. In other words, it's between two different people that two men that you would assume had nothing to do with each other, would never cross paths or anything like that. But it was each of those, their prayer, not that they were praying at the same time. One prayed one day, one prayed another day, but that kind of connected their two moments and put them together. And in case you forgot what I was talking about on those holy moments, it's times when it seems like that God pulls us to the side, and he's right there close, and he's got something he wants to show us, something he wants to teach us. Sometimes those are wonderful times, and sometimes, like Jonah last week, they was not so wonderful. Yeah, sometimes it could be a storm coming, and he knew, Jonah knew what was going on. He knew that storm was only for him. So it was a moment when God was getting his attention, but it wasn't such a nice thing. But many times for us, there'll be times maybe during a revival, maybe during a prayer time of a morning, maybe something going on in our life that God gets that closeness to us and begins to teach us or tell us something that he wanted us to hear. And we said last week, sometimes he has to do it because we're so busy in this world, we don't hear what he's got to say, so he slows things down for us. But tonight in Acts chapter number 10, I'm going to read several verses, starting there in verse number 1, and we'll kind of see how these two men, by their prayers and by God's answer to the prayer, is sort of changed what I would call the composition of the church, because you'll see how it changes. In Acts chapter number 10, verse number 1, the Bible says, there was a certain man in Caesarea called Cornelius, a centurion of the band called the Italian band, a devout man, and one that feared God with all his house, which gave much alms to the people and prayed to God always. Now, I'm going to stop there. This has got nothing to do with what I'm preaching about tonight, but verse 2 describes this fellow. Now, in our day, we read this verse, we're going to say, well, he's definitely he's a saved man. There's another place there in the book of Acts where it talks about a lady that they seen, and she was they were having prayer meetings and everything, but she wasn't saved. There's a lot of people in this world today. They love the Lord. They have a bend toward God, you could say. They have thoughts toward God, but they don't know enough. They've not been taught enough to understand how to be saved, and so it doesn't change that. And so here's a very devout man that said he feared God, and his whole house did. But you'll find later that, if you read the whole story, we're not going to read everything about it, but I don't believe he was saved until after this. But in verse 3 it says, he saw in a vision, I like the way it says this, I'm not sure. He says he saw in a vision evidently about the 9th hour of the day. And I don't know why that would evidently would be in there. I don't know what it makes any difference, but anyhow, it was about the 9th hour of the day, an angel of God coming into him and saying unto him, Cornelius. And when he looked on him, he was afraid and said, what is it, Lord? And he said unto him, thy prayers and thine alms are come up for a memorial before God, and now send men to Joppa and call for one Simon, whose surname is Peter. Now here's another thought that comes to me. It's got nothing to do with what I'm preaching on tonight. But I often have people ask me a question, preacher, what about a person that's in the remotest part of Africa, and there's no preacher there to tell them how to get saved? Are they going to be responsible before God? Yes, they are. And there was no preacher to tell Cornelius how to be saved. But because Cornelius had a bend toward God, because Cornelius loved God, he was doing all he could. And because he was doing all he could, God said, I'll send you some more. And God does that with people today. If there's someone out there who's they don't know enough about God. The Bible says that creation teaches us there's a God. Well, if they know enough through creation there is a God and they're trying to find him, God will send somebody that way. That's where missionaries come in and other people. God will send them that way. And so this is what's going on here with this man Cornelius. Drop down to verse 9 says, on the morrow as they went, he sent these men. As they went on their journey and drew nigh to the city, Peter went up upon the housetop to pray about the 6th hour. And he became very hungry. And he would have eaten, but while he made ready, he fell into a trance. This is what you do when you come to church. You fall into a trance, right? I know the preacher was going to say something, but I fell right to sleep. And verse 11 says, he saw heaven open and a certain vessel descending into it, as it had been a great sheet knit at the 4 corners and let down to the earth, wherein were all manner of 4-footed beasts of the earth, and wild beasts, and creeping things, and fowls of the air. And there came a voice to him, rise, Peter, kill and eat. But Peter said, not so, Lord, for I've never eaten anything that's common or unclean. And the voice spake again, and the voice spake unto him again the second time, what God hath cleansed, that call not thou common. This was done thrice, and the vessel was received up into heaven. Down in verse number 19, it says, while Peter thought on the vision, the Spirit said unto him, behold, 3 men seek thee. Arise, therefore, and get thee down, and go with them, doubting nothing, for I have sent them. Then Peter went down to the men which were sent unto him from Cornelius, and said, behold, I am he whom ye seek. What is the cause wherefore ye are come? And they said, Cornelius, the centurion, a just man, one that feareth God, and of great report among all the nation of the Jews, was warned from God by an holy angel to send for thee into his house, and to hear words of thee. Then called he them in, and lodged them. And on the morrow Peter went away with them, and certain brother from Joppa accompanied him. We'll stop there. You can read the rest of that. It is a great reading there about this Cornelius. But it first introduces us to him. He's a centurion. He's a Roman soldier. But we're told here that he fears God. He's not a pagan. He's not one who followed others. He doesn't understand enough about God. But he feared God so much, and he respected God to the point that his whole family, his whole household, had that tendency, and that's still true in this day we live. Your family has a tendency to follow after your leadership in the things you do. So I would say that was a result of the influence on his life. So that's who it starts talking about. But then it names the Apostle Peter. Well, everybody knows something about him. Peter's the one I would say at times he was spiritually brilliant. He did some great things for God, and at one time, you remember, he's the one, he said, Jesus asked him, who do people say I am? And he told them, and then he said, but we say you're the Christ, the Son of the living God. And he's the one that had faith enough to say, Lord, let me walk on the water to you. And the Lord told him, well, come. So sometimes he was what I call spiritually brilliant, but other times he was kind of off a little bit spiritually. And he's the one that also denied the Lord 3 times, right there toward the time of the Lord's crucifixion. He's the one that kind of got a little rash and a little in a hurry, and when the guards come to get Jesus, he cut one of their ears off, thinking I don't know what thought he was going to do, but he was going to defend him, and Jesus had to replace the ear. So these 2 men is what I'm getting at. They both prayed, and their lives connect through what I call a holy moment. So, but what do I learn from this? Well, there's some thoughts here, and one thing I got to do, I put something in my Bible that I got to pull out here and lay beside me so that I don't have to look to so many places. I have my shortcuts I put on here just in case, so I'll have them. But one of the things that I learned from this is these times, this closeness with God, and again, because I will never probably come up with a name unless some of you come up with a better terminology to use for me and help me with it, they reveal how unlimited our God is. I mean, he can put the lives of people who have no common denominator at all except the Lord. I tell people this all the time. It don't matter where we go. You could go as far out west as you want, but if you go into a church service and sit down, you'll feel like you know some of them people. You've known them because we have so much in common through Christ, but nothing else, maybe nothing whatsoever. And so here's Cornelius and Peter. they're never going to travel the same circles up until here anyhow. One's a Gentile and one's a Jew. And that day, those two didn't mix. They didn't cross. They wasn't good friends. They wasn't anything. And so here they are. That means they're not going to have any friends in common. And their occupations was nothing alike. One was a Roman soldier, Cornelius, and Peter, he was a fisherman who turned disciple. And so that wouldn't have brought them into any kind of networking group where they'd had anything common. They didn't live close to each other. If you look at it, I think it was a 2-day journey from one to the other. So they're not going to run into each other on the street or down at the Walmart shopping and start up a conversation. They're not going to see each other. And the only way these two men are going to get together is God has to put them together. I'm talking about what happens when people pray, what happens when God gets a hold of us and does things. And God put them together, what I call by personal invitation to each of them. And he did that while they were praying. So it shows me how unlimited our God is. And then I think about Faith Baptist Church. I think of all the people that God's brought through here down through the years, and it reminds me just how unlimited God is. And if you was to go to maybe you was in seminary or maybe you was in school somewhere, and you was talking about, I'm going to begin a church, going to start a church. Here's one of the first things they tell you, especially in this day: location is very important. You have to have a good location if you're going to start a work, if you're going to get something going. In this day and time, that's the number one thing that they will tell you. Well, we're in Cunot. Could I tell you that's not a location that would have been named on any of those maps? People don't know where Cunot is, and most people's never heard of Cunot. People as close as Greencastle have never heard of Cunot, and so it's a little place here in Owen County. We're not next to any big town. We're next to an interstate, but there's not a whole lot of folks that drive off of interstates to start going to church. I mean, we're not next to any really big main highways, and yet Faith Baptist Church has steadily grown over the years. And I say, why is that? Because of God. He has unlimited ability. He puts people together. He crosses paths. Today, I visited a family that was here a couple weeks ago. They lived around here for about 9 years, and they told me their name. It didn't ring a bell, but then I seen their address, and being a substitute mail carrier, I recognized who they were. And so I talked to him today. He said, "So you're the one that runs our mail route when I get the wrong mail?" I said, "Exactly. That's how I get people's attention." And so we had a good talk, and he grew up in Brownsburg and went to Bethesda Baptist Church, got saved there, and his wife went to Lisden Baptist Church or First Baptist in Lisden, but they've lived down here for a while, and they drive trucks, so they're never home. So, but I think they're going to start coming, and I thought to myself, even there as we was there talking today, I thought, God crosses our paths, and He brings people into, and then I think in the Bible, if God could put Philip and the Ethiopian eunuch together on a desert road. Philip's over here preaching in a big city, and this Ethiopian eunuch's down here nowhere close, and I don't know how Philip got there. I think God just took him out of there and just put him out there, but He put them together. It just shows me that God has the unlimited power to put people together, even in a place like Cunot. And so I'm grateful for that. And now, I don't go to a whole lot of preachers' fellowships. They have a lot of preachers' fellowships, but I usually don't have time, or maybe I should go to more, but I don't go to a lot of them. But occasionally when I do go, I'll hear someone talking, maybe some preachers around, and there'll be one or two that'll be talking about they're concerned about their church because it's in a bad spot. Probably no place is a worse spot than being in a recreation place around a lake. So I would say Cunot's not a good spot for it. We have 3 businesses now. We used to have just a tavern in us, but now we got a dollar store too, so we're growing in that. But I hear them talk about, well, they're concerned about their church. They talk about, well, we've had so many folks that move away, and in our neighborhood is kind of slipped, and nobody's going to want to come to a place like that. We need to move. And I hear them sometimes talk about we need to move our location, move our church, and do this. And the thought always goes to my mind. What you're doing is you are putting your faith in a strategic location. And I feel like I'd rather put my faith in God that says, you do what I'm telling you to do, and I'll bring the people in. And that's what He does. And so we ought to kind of long for those moments in our life, like Peter and Cornelius, because in those moments it might get us to the place where we learn to trust God no matter what's going on around us. And that's what these guys do. So that's one lesson I learned here. And then a second thing that I see from this is sometimes the people that you think are going to shine the brightest don't. And it's the ones that you don't put a lot of confidence in that do so much more. And I think about, like in the day we live, when if a big sports star, if they get saved or something, or somebody says, oh, they'll do good for the Lord. They'll really be a big, well, anybody can be a big influence for God if they want to be. And a lot of times those big sports people, they may get saved, but then they don't follow the Lord very close, and they practice a lot of things that brings a disgrace to them. And so when I look at this story, here's two men. One of them is a disciple of Christ. He traveled with him. He heard him preach. He saw all the healings and everything he did. He was there after Jesus rose from the dead, so he knows the grave's not going to can't hold Jesus. And this was a man that, okay, I'm expecting quite a bit from him because he's been with the Lord. He was there before he was crucified, after he was crucified. But the other one, he's a Roman soldier. Probably never came into contact with Jesus himself. What limited information he had, he probably got it just from hearing conversations of different places where he was. In fact, you can tell by the words, we didn't read all the words, but when Peter went there, the Holy Spirit had him go and preach to Cornelius. If you read what he preached to him 100% gospel. I mean, he talked to him about how Christ had hung on a tree and raised on the third day, and he was shown to many witnesses, and one day he's going to come and he's going to judge the living and the dead, and you have to believe in him for the remission of sin. He needed to hear how to be saved, what he needed to hear. He needed to hear the gospel, and that's what God gave him. And certainly, you would expect of these two people, Jesus would probably outshine Cornelius because he's been with the Lord. He knows all this. But when you read the story, Cornelius did everything that he was told to do. He did it exactly. And not the angel told him. And Peter didn't even talk to an angel. Peter talked to the Lord himself. And God told him, he said, arise, kill, and eat. And what did he say? No, well, let's wait there. Yeah, I've never ate anything common. I've never done that. And 3 times he had to tell him before he finally did what he was supposed to. And I think about that. What about us? Sometimes we think, I think about it more about myself than I do about anybody else, but I think people think, well, you're a preacher. You're going to do all these things, and I think to myself, how many times did God ask me to do something and I didn't do it? How many times maybe he asked me to talk to someone about the Lord and I passed it up. I've told you the story about Mrs. Miller. She's passed away now, but I was at a gas station and she was there. I was filling up and she had her hood up. I didn't know her. She was an older lady and looked like she was struggling. And God didn't speak to me out loud, but he may as well have. He pretty well said, you need to go talk to her. You need to see if she's okay. And I didn't do it. And I got in the van and I took off and I started and I went around the block and he didn't quit talking to me. So I come back around the block and I pulled back up there and I asked her and she said, well, my husband's in the hospital and we got this new car and he told me to check the oil. And she said, I have no idea how to check the oil in this. She just had the hood up and was walking around it. I guess it's like the walls of Jericho. If you raise the hood and walk around it so many times, it'll check itself. But she was there doing that, and so I checked the oil for her and talked with her, and then she drove off, and she told me her name was Bonnie, and she said her husband's name was Clyde. Now that stuck with me because I don't remember anybody's name, but you don't forget a Bonnie and a Clyde. And I thought, I didn't get her address, I didn't get anything. And I thought, boy, and I'm thinking about, I didn't really tell the Lord no, but I didn't do a very good job of doing what he told me to do. But since I knew Bonnie and Clyde, I found Bonnie and Clyde. I got to looking around, and I found them, and I showed up at their house and was able to visit with her, and her husband did pass away soon after. But my thought is, when God asks you to talk to somebody, do you do it? When the Lord has asked me to help someone maybe who's struggling with this or that, do I do it? Sometimes you'll be in church, and I mention this a lot on Sundays especially. I tell you, look around, somebody's missing. Call them up. See if they're all right. Do you do that? Do I do that? And you see, if I look at the real me, sometimes I'm shocked to know I'm not as good a Christian as I think I ought to be. I'm not doing a lot of things I should be doing. And so that's what I'm saying. That when I read this story, there are those who you think is going to really shine bright, and that's not always the ones who do. Sometimes it's everyday people, and I can name you folks in this church that they're just doing whatever they can do, and God knows that, and God will honor that, and God will reward that. And then the third thing I see in this story, and I've got another fellow I want to read about tonight also beside these two, but third thing I see is we need these holy moments with God in our life, because sometimes what that does is it moves what we know from our head to our heart. There's a big difference. I've heard people say before the distance. I remember when I was young, a kid here in this church, someone preached something. He said that the distance between the head to the heart is about 18 inches. But there's a lot of people who know about God in their head, but they've never got him in their heart. And they're still not saved. They're still, and so there is a big difference on how we respond with our thinking and how we respond with our heart. So here's Peter. He was with Jesus all those years in this ministry. He saw with his own eyes all these miracles, and he remembered all that. He stored it all up in his head. He knew all of these things. He saw him heal those with leprosy and the different things, and he saw him there as he went and he ate with sinners, and he called children unto him, and he sent the woman in adultery. Remember, he sent her away and said, neither do I condemn thee, go and sin no more. That was the phrase he used. And he saw him there as he as he healed this servant of the Roman centurion, and all of that was in his mind. All that he knew. And then he also knew this great commission where Jesus proclaimed, he said, go and make disciples, you remember what he said? Of all nations. So he knew all of that. And yet, it was in his head, and when Jesus started telling him to go, he started showing him this vision, started telling him to go to Cornelius. He didn't want to go to Cornelius, because what happened? Cornelius was not a Jew. He was something different. He was a Gentile, and we don't deal with Gentiles. And so he knew it in his head, but it had not quite got to his heart what he was supposed to do. But after his time with God, here's what he says in verse number 34. It had got from his head, it went to his heart. He said in verse 34, says, then Peter opened his mouth and said, of a truth, I perceive that God is no respecter of persons, but in every nation he that feareth him and worketh righteousness is accepted by him. The word which God sent unto the children of Israel, preaching peace by Jesus Christ, he is the Lord of all. See, it took a while for Peter to get it. God had told him, but it still wasn't sinking in. And so it brought a heart-opening moment into his life. What he knew in his head got down to where his heart was finally. And I say that for us because sometimes there's things we know. Sometimes we know what we should be doing. We know all these things, but it's not really got to our heart. It's just in our head. But sometimes when God gets our attention, he gets to our heart, and we decide, that's what I'm going to be. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to follow that practice. We've still got plenty of time, so I want to take a look at another, what I call one more of those holy moments tonight. It would be over in the book of Exodus, and I can't remember what chapter until I get over there. Chapter number 3, Exodus chapter number 3. Now, again, remember, that a holy moment is a time when God in particular gets my full attention. Now, we've seen different ways. We've seen how he did it with Jonah. We've seen it through prayer, how he did it here with Peter, and how he did it with this Cornelius. But he's got something he wants to tell us, and so he has to get our attention. But this one is one of the more famous ones in the Bible that probably everybody knows. Everybody knows the story of Moses and how he fled Egypt after he discovered that some of his Jewish brethren had seen him kill an Egyptian. And he's just figuring, well, if they know it, eventually Pharaoh's going to know it, and then he's going to come looking for me, and I'm going to be dead. So he got out, and what he ended up doing, he fled. He ended up in the land of Midian, in the desert. He married a fellow's daughter named Jethro. Well, now his wife wasn't Jethro; that was his father-in-law. Yeah, but he married one of Jethro's daughters, and he tended to his dad's sheep there for 40 years. That was what he was doing for 40 years, and I don't read anywhere in the Bible there where he had communication with God during those 40 years. Now, maybe he did, But I don't read. I read where he was just out there. He was gone for 40 years, and so I think it was more than just a dry place physically. I think for him it was a dry place spiritually, and I think he was. He needed something, and God sent him something. In chapter number 3, and you remember the story, most of it was at the burning bush. So I'll read some of it here in chapter 3 and verse 1. It says, "Now Moses kept the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. And he led the flock to the backside of the desert and came to the mountain of God, even to Horeb. And the angel of the Lord appeared unto him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. And he looked, and behold, the bush burned with fire, and the bush was not consumed. And Moses said, I'll now turn aside and see this great sight, why the bush is not burned. And when the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called unto him out of the midst of the bush and said, Moses, Moses. And he said, Here am I. And he said, Draw not nigh hither, put off thy shoes from off thy feet, for the place wherein thou standest is holy ground. Moreover, he said, I am the God of thy father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look upon God. So here's God's got his attention. So what do I learn from this little thing? And again, these are just short thoughts that we're throwing in on a Wednesday night. But God used this holy moment, even though Moses thought, well, if you'd asked Moses, he said, this is 40 years too late. It was just on time for God. But he used it to reveal to Moses, I've got something big planned for your life. Now, again, Moses thought that was gone 40 years ago. It's too late now. And because today, on this day, for Moses, ordinary life was tending the flock of his father-in-law, Jethro, back in the desert. 40 years earlier, normal life was for him, was living in Pharaoh's palace, eating Pharaoh's food. But there in the palace, he saw how bad the Jews was getting treated. He saw what was going on with them. And he got this idea that God's going to use me to deliver these people. And next thing you know, he kills one of the Egyptians. You see, God wasn't ready to use him yet. God was going to use him, but he jumped the gun. He got ahead of God. And I thought about that as I was writing these notes down. You ever do that? You ever get out ahead of God and pretty well fail miserably? I could name you some things that I've done in my life that I thought was this, that I think this is what God wants me to do. And later I thought, you know what? I don't think I quite dug into that enough. But Moses did, and he killed an Egyptian, and they saw it, and he knew he had to flee, so he got out of there. So now for 40 years, his ordinary was just tending flocks. Again, my thought is God used this holy moment. In fact, I would call this things that God uses in ordinary life. So you see, most of the stuff that God does in your life and mine is an ordinary day, not a spectacular day. God gets my attention a lot more on the day I'm sitting back there in my office, while I'm studying, while I'm praying, while I'm doing this. He'll bring things to my attention. He'll get my attention about things. It's not spectacular things. Sometimes it is, but not very often. And so here's Moses every day in and day out. He's out there with the flock, not having much contact with people. Probably not much information got to him about what was going on back with the Jews in Egypt. And any thoughts of him doing something great for the Jews had left him several years before. He wasn't thinking anything like that. And the truth is, God's waiting for Moses to get ready. Because if God had taken these Jews out of Egypt while he was still in Pharaoh's, likely Moses would have tried to do something. In fact, Moses did try to do something in his own strength. That's what he'd have tried to do. He'd have tried to use his power and to do things. And we do that a lot of times. We try to do things in our own strength, and we fail because we're not trusting God. And so now 40 years has passed. I'd say Moses probably didn't have much pride left. Wasn't much to brag about. And not much self-reliance left. All that went by the wayside. And the truth is, sometimes God has to get the pride out of us and get the self-reliance out of us before he can use us. But now in chapter 3 and verse 10, he says, Come now, therefore, and I will send thee unto Pharaoh, that thou mayest bring forth my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. And God knew it was a good time, because here's how Moses answered. Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh? Verse 11. See, Moses didn't think, he said, you picked the right guy here, Lord, because I'll go in there and I'll show them who's doing it. No, he didn't have any thoughts like that now. He said, who am I? I'm nobody. They're not going to listen to me. He was no longer able to rely on any of his own strength, any of his own abilities. And could I tell you, that's exactly where God wants all of us. He wants to get us to the place where we're not relying on ourselves. We don't have high ideas about ourselves. We don't have high thoughts. Now, there's a difference between not having high thoughts about yourself and thinking yourself cannot do anything. I know some people down through the years. I think about this. I've often been involved with the music here, and we've had a lot of people. We still got some that are very good singers. But if you ask them, no, I can't sing a song. I couldn't sing. I mean, it's no good. Well, they just need to sing. They just need to do it. Now, granted, there are some I wouldn't ask because I know they can't sing. But the truth is, there are people who can do that. And that's not having a low esteem. That's I call that reverse pride. They know they can do it. I don't know if they're just waiting on 10 more people to ask them or what. But people do that sometimes. And so, but Moses, he was not relying on anything of himself. He didn't think of anything that he could do anything. And so it kind of helps me to see this that God was planning something big for us. So we need to know that. And then a second thing that comes to my mind with this, these holy moments remind me that when I'm going through life, I need to be careful to examine everything, because it's possible the next thing I see might just be God doing a work, and I might not recognize it. And here's what I'm talking about. Verse 2 says, the angel of the Lord appeared unto him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. And he looked, and behold, the bush burned with fire, and the bush was not consumed. And Moses said, I'll now turn aside. Now, again, I like the way things are written sometimes, and I picture, man, is this the way you would say this? I will now turn aside and see why this bush is not burned. No, I said, what in the world's going on over there? That thing ought to be burned up. And first thing I'd have done, I'd have went and got my wife and sent her over there to see why it wasn't burned up. But that's not what he did. But anyhow, this is a desert region. Now, I did some reading on this because I've often wondered about this. But I'm told that this region, for one, would be today a part of Saudi Arabia. But that's where he's been tending his sheep. But I'm also told that in that area there are several types of bushes and trees that, because of the dry conditions, they do just ignite. So this was something that he's probably seen for 40 years being there. He's probably seen this quite a few times. And so, again, my thought is, it reminds me that I need to look close at things happening, ordinary things, because the ordinary things God might be trying to get my attention in. And this was just an ordinary thing. There's a bush over there burning. Bushes burn all the time. And in fact, it kind of lets us know there that he's not really surprised by it. But what caught his attention was it never burned up. Now, that's a little bit different. That's the kind of log I was looking for when I used to burn firewood all the time. If I could have found one of those, put it on at the end of the winter, put it out, that would have been a great thing. But what's happening here? And what is happening is God chose to visit Moses in an ordinary, everyday scene, something he sees all the time. Now, had he just nonchalantly looked over there and maybe saw this out of the corner of his eye burning, he might have said to himself, well, just another bush burning. Another day in the desert, there's another bush burning over there, and nothing else. But it doesn't say that. It says he looked and beheld. Now, that's not a glance. That's mean I'm looking. There's something to this. I'm going to consider what's going on here. And I thought about it's like when I'm out mowing the grass, and I've been out working all day, and all of a sudden I'm coming in, and my wife looks out. She looks and considers. Said, here comes my man. He's coming to the house. That's more than just a glance. I don't know if that's what happens or not. But anyhow, Moses, he realized there's something different about this bush. It's not burning up, and it's not ordinary. This is not like everything else. But again, I think I might have just said, I'm getting away from that thing. The bush could keep burning like that. It might blow up. I don't know what it's going to do. I'm getting out of here. But no, he wasn't afraid of it. He says he went toward it so he could see it better, so he could figure it out. And here's my thought. Sometimes in our life, our ordinary becomes a little bit different. Don't run from it. See if maybe God's trying to tell me something here. See if maybe he's trying to say something, and it might be he's trying to get your attention. He's trying to use this thing, and our job is to see if there is something different about this situation, and instead of turning away from it, turn to it and find out what it is that God. Talk to God about it. Say, hey, Lord, why in the world is this happening like this? If he doesn't already begin to talk. And so he does that. So as you go through life and as I go through life, most everything is ordinary, everyday things. But look at those ordinary things and see if there's something different. Maybe God's trying to say something to us. And then one more thought, and we'll be done here in a second. Some of you wish we was done already. Holy moments. They ought to remind us of how holy God is. And we need to recognize that the holy ground, you know, you read the story there with me, or we told him, don't go any closer, you're on holy ground. Could I tell you, it's a lot closer for us than it was for Moses? Was there something special about that sand there? No. It wasn't no different than any other sand. It wasn't like God brought sand down out of heaven and put it there. So he said, Moses, don't walk on this sand because it's here. What made it special was God's presence there. It was holy ground. In Moses' day, that was the closest you could get to holy ground, to be in the presence of God. But that's different today. Because when you and I got saved, God moved in. And we are holy ground. We don't have a choice. Now let me rephrase that. The ground didn't have a choice. It was holy ground because God was there. We're to be holy ground. But we have to choose how we're going to use our body, what we're going to do. As a child of God, we ought to say, you know what, I'm not going to do that. That's not good. That doesn't represent the Lord well. That's not good for my body. And I represent God. I am the temple of God. So again, the ground had no choice, but we do how we're going to use our body and how we're going to do things. And Peter says it this way. It says, but as he which hath called you is holy, so be ye holy in all manner of conversation, because it is written, be ye holy, for I am holy. So God give you and I a free will. Although he saved us, and although we owe him things, and although we should do certain things, he'll not make us do that. But here's what he says about it. Here's what God himself says about it. It says, what, know you not that your body is the temple of the Holy Ghost, which is in you, which you have of God, and you're not your own. For you're bought with a price. Therefore, glorify God in your body and in your spirit, which are God's. So I wonder, do you wake up this morning? Did you wake up this morning and say, you know what? I got to take care of my old body today because it's holy ground. It belongs to God. I'm sure none of us do it real well as we ought to, but it is holy ground because he moved in. When I got saved, the Holy Spirit moved in. So Moses' encounter with that burning bush, it ought to remind us just how close we are to holy ground. God said, take your shoes off here. Well, what would he say to us today? Take care of what I've given you. Make sure you honor me with your life. And so how ought we live with our life? Well, we ought to do what he told Moses. First, we ought to wait on God's timing. Don't jump ahead like Moses did. Then we ought to look for ways that God might be trying to reveal himself to us in everyday things of life. Because there's probably a lot of times God tries to get our attention. As I mentioned last week with Jonah, Jonah was so busy, he wasn't listening to God, and so God had to slow things down for him to get his attention. Sometimes God has to do that to get us there. And then we need to remember each day that the Lord lives in me, so I am holy ground. And he expects me to live a life that brings honor and glory to him. So that's a couple more of the holy moments, and I don't know if I've got any more that I don't have any right now, but I may come up some more for next week. But again, I thank you for being here. I don't know if anybody knows. I heard that we got like 5 inches of snow while we were in here. No, I don't think we've had 5 inches of snow in the last 3 years, to be honest with you. But you still need to be careful out there when you go, because we don't want anybody hitting the blacktop. That's not fun. So be extra careful. Let's spend a little time in prayer if you've got a prayer list with you. And then hopefully we'll see you. If you want to come tomorrow night, this will be a good place to be with having a great program. And then we'll see you back on Sunday after that, and be praying for our visitors. Hopefully we'll have some visitors come and be part of our service on Sunday. Let's go to prayer.